Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. I'm the author of 4 books on philosophy, one of which is the Philosophical Equations of Economics. And these books are available at the philosophicalangle.com. And if you'd like to make comment or inquire, make suggestions, free to email us at contact@thephilosophicalangle.com. Along with me is my colleague and co-host Rick Samuelson. Rick graduated from Yale and has MBAs from Wharton and Tufts, and Rick is an independent venture capitalist. Good to see you, Rick.
And you.
The purpose of the Philosophical Angle program is to examine the nature of concepts being used in current media, and throughout a number of years now, we constantly hear the leftist Democrats calling names of the Republicans, and typically you hear the words such as racist. So what do you say when a leftist calls you such names as deplorable, fascist, hateful, bigoted, racist, uncompassionate, and so on? They've got quite a litany of suggestions of our nature, and it's you sit back and you look. We're all fallible. We all have sinned, and no one's perfect. So what do you do? The answer is that you have to call them something. You have to have a retort of some kind. So I'd like to suggest that we call them un-American. And so in order for us to call them un-American, I think we need to prepare ourselves with an argument why they are un-American. Of course, we're fallible, we're human, so some of us are deplorable, and I'm a bit deplorable at times. And so what is being American? What is the nature of America? And so how could we discover this? Where can we look to find the values of being American? And I think the best place to start is the Declaration of Independence, which gave us really the most concise listing of the values of being American. And as Thomas Jefferson said, and he was influenced by the philosopher John Locke, that our values are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So let's examine the nature of these 3 concepts and see what we come up with. And thus the first value is life. So where do we start? There into understanding this concept? And I'd like to suggest that the first dictum of life is that all entities want to live and seek goodness continually. And I think this is overwhelmingly obvious. I think that with this concept, we don't need to look to our biological or spiritual meaning of life. I think we can go directly to the economic meaning of life, because I think we're 90% economic beings. And that brings us really to the first law of economics, of what I think is the first law of economics, and that is that we humans seek and continue. It's a derivative of the first dictum. We humans seek and continue to seek that which is good for ourselves. And so once life has acquired some goodness for itself, this goodness acquisition doesn't stop there. It continues. It continues for the life of the person. It continues for all humans. And if someone can acquire more goodness, that person will do so. And this would explain why humans not only acquire that which will bring them to a level of subsistence, but will continue to seek the acquisition of continued goodness to bring them up to higher levels, to even be wealthy and more. There is no end to the amount of goodness that we humans seek, and it can be not only in wealth, but it can be spiritually, and it can be intellectually, and we always seek that which will accrue to our benefit. So now we move on to the second concept, and which is liberty. And I think another word for that would be freedom. And so let's define freedom. And freedom is the creation of one's priorities and then the execution of those priorities. And in order for us to understand this, we now need to define what a priority is. And a priority is a piece of knowledge by which we're able to order our lives. We pick and choose our likes and dislikes, which we need for the purpose to bring order to our lives. And the origin of a priority comes from two types of stimuli that comes to our consciousness. And there are two types: one exterior originating, and ones that originate from inside of you. And the external obviously comes from our environment to our consciousness, and internally it comes from our body to our consciousness. And this stimuli is called information. And when our consciousness attaches an importance to these bits of information, we get a priority, and that's called a piece of knowledge. And we take this priority, which is our knowledge, and we order our lives. And we can execute these priorities and make decisions and carry out our daily lives. And we do this with, and when we do this without external coercion, that is from the priorities of others, then we have freedom. And the third concept we need to define is Jefferson's pursuit of happiness. And the pursuit of happiness comes from the freedom of adhering to the law of the unlimited demand for the good. But there is a second dimension to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that we need to discuss here. Is that we're not individuals alone out in the wilderness, and so we're in a society with individuals with whom we cooperate, at least to some extent. And so we want to cooperate in order to produce the goods and services for ourselves and our families, which brings us up away from misery, which is the essence of all that is good. And so we want to cooperate with others because we realize that we are more efficient in being together and cooperating than we do it separately. All you have to do is look at an assembly line as a good example of why that works. And so that efficiency is what drives us to become cooperative. So we will just by being in a society, we will occasionally come across circumstances in which priorities come into conflict with the priorities of others. And an example of this would be when you're applying for a job and it's the same job that somebody else wants. So there you are with two people applying for the same job, and that's called competition. And we all know about competition. But we need to understand what the nature of competition is and its definition in order to understand the concept of the pursuit of happiness, because it's the pursuit of happiness within a society that leads us to competition. Well, competition is the convergence and divergence of priorities. So I think we already know what the convergence of priorities is the situation by which you have the same priority as somebody else, which presents us with competition to obtain the same things that somebody else wants. And as we just mentioned, for example, with two people vying for the same job, you have a group of buyers striving for the same product, or such as a number of buyers trying to buy the same stock equity. If the number of buyers are many and the number of sellers are few, then competition results, and it's an increase in the value of the stock price. Everybody pretty much knows about this. And so anyway, we know about the convergence of priorities, which is competition, but it's the divergence that is of great interest here. It's the second half of competition, and this is the portion of competition that brings us into the existence of competition as a concept in economics, because divergence means when entities know that when they're in competition, that they know that it's bad for their economic health, and so their well-being economically is inhibited. So what happens is that companies and really any of life entities try to diverge from this primary priority. And the job seeker will seek many jobs. The stock buyer will look to not only one stock but to others in the same industry to see if there's an equivalent or better opportunity that might present itself. And companies that are in competition with others, they'll make a divergence a priority. And so that the company will make, as a result, the company will make new products and construct and generate and create new attributes to its products that will diversify. And so they can divert from being into direct competition with others. And the result is that you get a complete differentiation of products in a marketplace automatically. And it's due to the law of differentiation, which comes from the essence of competition and from that divergence of priorities. So now we have a basic understanding of what it is to be American, which is to adhere to the attributes of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So now we can look at what a liberal says to a conservative, in that he's an exemplar of all the frailties and sins that humans create and do. And of course we have to admit that we are sinners, that we all have detractions. So when liberals point out that we are deplorable, or they point out that we're despicable and at times we're uncompassionate, so what do? So we are to know that we are more American than they are. And so why is that? We are more American than they are because they, as the Democratic left, tend to choose less freedom for the individual. They tend to interdict the law of unlimited demand for the good. And they tend to work toward interdicting competition. And if you interdict and impede competition, then you're impeding that divergence of those who are creating goods and services. And if you are impeding the law of differentiation, and you impede this divergence of new products and services, then you're impeding the creation of knowledge that goes along with making these new goods and services, and therefore you impede the actual first dictum of life, that all life seeks that which is good for it. And as a result, you would impede all the great products and services that have been produced by the medical industry, the food industry, the travel industry, the housing industry, and all the other industries that bring goodness into our lives and bring us up away from misery. And we know that these progressive liberals interdict this process because they seek to enhance the purpose of the federal government first, to solve the problems of society. And government uses coercion in the enforcement of more and more regulations and laws which act as anti-knowledge, and they impede this progress toward life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that is what is un-American. So let me stop talking and let's ask Rick to see what he thinks about this. What do we do when a liberal calls us deplorable or despicable?
Well, let me start with this. I would describe Thomas Jefferson and the founders as a product of Enlightenment, which draws on two great traditions, Judeo-Christian tradition and the Greco-Roman classical tradition of virtue. And that was understood. Both these great traditions are, have principles that are meant to apply to all people under all circumstances, that serve as a guide for everyone in life. I think the left today would consider, they might not admit it, but in practice they consider the civil rights legislation of the 60s as the source of the binding principles that are to be applied across all societal problems today. And that is one way of understanding how they behave. They call conservatives racist because it works. And the civil rights legislation has empowered them with certain principles that they've obviously extended way beyond what they were originally intended to do, such that they have introduced this concept of ethnic specialization, ethnic identity. If you look across the universities, if you look across hiring, if you look across numerous regulations, you see this emphasis on race, on status, on entitlements. All of this stuff grew out of the civil rights legislation. It's not nowhere in the Constitution. It's certainly not in the Declaration of Independence. And it has literally nothing to do with the great traditions that animated the Enlightenment. I think in Saul Alinsky, they found, in addition to that, a means of weaponizing their project in order to quell opposition. So a case in point would be corporate America, right? Corporate America doesn't want to be embarrassed. They're basically fearful. And so by employing some of the Alinsky principles of insulting left and right and exposing and the hyperbole associated with all of that, they have successfully cowed corporate America into abiding by most, if not all, of their principles, whether it concerns, the absurd obsession with diversity at the expense of everything else, with the absurd obsession with ethnic representation above and beyond who's actually qualified to do the work, all of this stuff has been taken to such an extreme and so successfully that you have to ask, why would they stop doing it? It's worked and it continues to work. The only way to fight it, the only way to turn it back or even just slow it down, because I don't think you can point to any instances in which the conservatives have actually reversed this trend, they've slowed it down a bit, is to expose rigorously with the use of facts what the consequences are. So let us consider the inner cities of the United States. Nearly every one of them is run by Democrats and has had some form of progressive policy in place for years and years and years. And look at the condition of most of them. It's horrific. That needs to be brought to light. Those facts need to be exposed. Those failures need to be exposed. And they get very little attention. Why? Because if you say anything, you're labeled a racist. So the answer in my mind is to expose the facts, welcome the label, and carry on.
Right. So immediately in response to if you're at a cocktail party and someone says, you're deplorable, what's your response?
I'm deplorable because I'm seeking the truth.
Okay. And the truth shall set you free, I guess.
Indeed.
Okay.
That's the price of being deplorable.
Right. Where do you think America will go from here? Will it become more liberal, and more divided? Or do you think there's hope to return to an equity of...
No, I think we're seeing before our very eyes a regionalization of the United States of the sort we haven't seen since the Civil War. And this crisis has now made choosing your region easier than ever. So, for example, the fact that you can do a lot of your work remotely means that you can still work for Microsoft and live in Utah. Okay? You don't have to live in Seattle. You can choose the regulatory framework under which you can live. And those regulatory frameworks and the educational systems associated with them are diverging day by day. I mean, there's a famous case in Seattle that came to light recently, whereby the school board voted to give all the kids A's for reasons of equity, whatever that means. It certainly doesn't mean assets minus liabilities.
So are you predicting? Are you predicting a dichotomy that will grow amongst the electorate? Some will move to low tax states, and others will stay where they are, and some will go to conservative colleges, some will go to liberal colleges.
Yes. Yes.
And so the divide will increase in the future.
Yes, dramatically.
Very interesting. Okay. Thanks, Rick, for that, and we'll see everybody else on the next week on another episode of The Philosophical Angle.
Thank you.